Hi, welcome everyone. We're gonna get started as folks trickle in. So welcome. Um, Welcome to today's webinar, the Genetically Engineering the Farm, where we will be exploring emerging technologies and what they mean for climate, biodiversity, farmers, and all of us. I'm Dana Pearls. I'm the Senior Management Manager of the Emerging Technology team at Friends of the Earth, and I will be moderating for you all for today's discussion. So before we get started, I'll just cover a couple of housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will share a link after the event is complete and would welcome you to revisit the webinar and share it with your colleagues. We invite your comments and your questions. There's a Q&A chat box on the bottom of the screen. And so if you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and we'll receive it and respond at the end. We'll be collecting all of them and we'll save it for the last 15 minutes during the discussion portion of the event. So today's topic, we are looking at the new wave of genetically engineered organisms that are being commercialized in agriculture, from insects and soil microbes to gene silencing pesticide sprays that modify insects in real time in farm fields. Some of these technologies are already being used on millions of acres of US farmland. And so we're at this really critical juncture in which true solutions for farmers facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and corporate consolidation within the food system and farm sectors are really imperative. And so our speakers today will discuss the social and economic consequences, what science says about the potential risks for human health, communities, and the environment, as well as the current state of US and international governments of these applications. So Jim Thomas will be our first speaker today. He is a writer, an analyst tracking the social and ecological impacts of these new technologies, particularly within the food system. He's worked with ETC Group and Greenpeace International and is involved in the UN Biodiversity Convention's synthetic biology expert body and other international civil society networks for food sovereignty. Then we'll hear from Angel Garcia, who is the co-director at Californians for Pesticide Reform. He's the founder and coordinator of the local coalition, Tulare County Coalition, advocating for pesticide safety, and is a Tulare County native. Then we'll hear from Kendra Klein, who is a PhD and Deputy Director of Science at Friends of the Earth. She leads research on pesticides, environmental health, and sustainable agriculture. She's held positions at Physicians for Social Responsibility, Healthcare Without Harm, and Breast Cancer Action. So without further ado, I'd like it to turn it over to Jim, who will tell us about gene silencing pesticides, robot-ready crops, and other trends in ag tech that we're seeing in agriculture. So Jim, turning it over to you.
Thanks very much, Dana. Much appreciated. So the technological landscape of industrial agriculture is changing, and that's really what we're going to be looking at today in this webinar. And my task, I think, is to give a sort of broad overview of how that technological landscape is changing, and some trends, and then to focus down on one or two specific technologies. I think it's worth looking back to where we were 30 years ago this month. In fact, 30 years ago this month in 1994, we had the approval of the first major GMO crop, Roundup Ready soya from Monsanto. And that technological landscape was very different. If you remember, those of us who were around, that was a time when we were still watching films on VHS. Some of us might have been communicating by pages. The first web browser was being launched. It was a different technological time. And this technology of Roundup Ready GMO soy was all focused around the glyphosate, Roundup, the pesticide that Monsanto was selling. And the idea was that you could spray as much as you wanted of this on top of a genetically modified soybean. Everything else on the field would die, but the soybean would do just fine, the soy plant. And as a result of that, the playbook for the large companies of the day, Novartis, DuPont, Monsanto, was about trying to sell as much chemicals as possible. That was the focus of their strategies, that they would sell you a GMO soybean that would work with their chemicals, and they would ensnare the farmers in legal contracts so they couldn't save the seeds and they had to keep buying the chemicals from Monsanto. And the outcome of that was that we saw a massive increase in the chemicals they were trying to sell. Roundup use skyrocketed. In fact, there's been almost 20 billion pounds of Roundup applied to agricultural fields in the last 30 years, with all sorts of impacts. So that was the business plan behind the first generation of GMO technology. Now let's bring it bang up to date. This year, we're about to see the planting of not Roundup ready, but what I call robot ready soy. There's a company called Plant, and they're working with Syngenta, which used to be Novartis, and John Deere, the machinery company. And they've genetically modified a soy plant so that it fluoresces, it emits a light when it's under stress. Either it's stressed because it hasn't got enough water or because of pest attack. And that light can be picked up by sensors that can be from a satellite or from a drone, and then that will be processed by artificial intelligence, and it will direct robotic machinery, where to spray, where to add water, where to add fertilizer. This time, the focus is not on the pesticide. The focus is on the machinery. It's on the artificial intelligence. The soy plant has been engineered to work with the robots, basically. And so the playbook today of big ag is very much around robots, data, automation, this idea that we're going to digitize the food system. But it's also around claims that we're going to have climate-ready crops, which are going to be able to create carbon credits, and also an interest in going beyond just GMO crops to looking at other parts of the agricultural ecosystem. And I'll explain that a little bit. So this is roughly the vision for agriculture by big agribusiness in 2024. The idea is that the farm is a digital farm. Lots of data is coming in from satellites and drones. It's going to the iPad of the farmer, who has a special digital platform where predictions are being made and suggestions are being made by an artificial intelligence agent about where we should plant, where we should spray, what kind of intervention should be done. And then automated machinery will carry that out. This is called digital farming or smart farming. And at the heart of this are these digital platforms where an artificial intelligence system will take lots of data from the farm and then be able to make these prescriptions. In fact, they'll tell the farmer how to farm. And the most successful of these is by Bayer, which was previously Monsanto, who had paid about $1 billion to buy a company called Climate Corporation. And at the time, in 2013, Monsanto said, we're moving away from being a seed company or a pesticide company to being an information technology company. Today, this is the heart of Bayer's business. FieldView is used over 220 million acres. That's about 5% of global farmland, and it covers more acreage than GMOs itself. And it's by having these prescriptions, these artificial intelligence generated farming prescriptions, that Monsanto, which is now Bayer, hopes to lock farmers into buying more of its products, whether that's seeds or pesticides and so forth. And just to note that it's not just the fields that are being farmed by artificial intelligence prescriptions. Actually, the seeds are being developed through artificial intelligence. The proteins that are being used in the pesticides are being designed through artificial intelligence. The heart of these strategies is about big data and artificial intelligence. At the same time, what they're saying to farmers is, if you use our platforms, you use our digital platforms, and you agree to sign up to legal contracts for up to 10 years, we will tell you how to farm, and in return, you will get carbon credits. That means that you're sequestering carbon dioxide in your soils. And these carbon credits, whether they're created by Corteva or Bayer, can then be sold to a 200 billion a year market. And so farmers are told that they will be growing carbon credits alongside their crops. So this is the claim that's being made. And in return, the companies that get the food, Nestle, Cargill, PepsiCo, are claiming that their food is climate ready or regenerative. There's a problem in this. There's a massive amount of data that's required, and that data is all energy. And when you start to look at the increasing amount of energy that's now being used to run these systems, it's really pushing our energy systems to the brink with lots of carbon dioxide emissions. So this maybe isn't true. But also the companies are saying, we're not really using GMOs anymore. We're using a different type of genetic engineering, which is genome editing, so we can get around the technical definition of GMOs. They're talking about gene drives. These are where you can genetically engineer an organism so that it spreads in a population, and that's a new way of trying to destroy populations of pests, such as insects. And thankfully, we'll hear from Angèle about GMO insects, which are increasingly an issue. And there's a focus on trying to modify the microbes in the soil. So in effect, these companies are not just working on genetically engineering the crops, they're trying to engineer all the parts of the ecosystem, the soil, the insects, and so forth. I'm going to talk a little bit about RNAi sprays. And this is a new way in which pesticides are now being made that uses a different part of genetic engineering, and are sometimes called gene silencing pesticides. So usually, if I can move forward here, yes. When we think about a genetically modified organism, what's happened is that you've changed the DNA, so-called code, genetic code of the organism. And that's been done in a lab beforehand. You've changed the code so it does something different. It has a new trait. And then you'll multiply those up and you'll sell the seeds to farmers. The actual genetic engineering, the change in the genetic functioning, has happened before the seed gets to the field. And it's been done by changing this DNA, the so-called code, genetic code. But DNA is only really part of the story with the genetics of a living organism. That the code, so-called, doesn't do anything unless it expresses itself. And the way it does that is through another molecule called RNA. And the RNA then turns into proteins, and those proteins really are the workhorses of biomolecular life, of biochemistry. And one way you can intervene in the genetics of the organism is not by hitting the code, it's by hitting the expression, by changing the RNA, which then becomes the proteins. And that's what's now happening. By creating short pieces of RNA and interjecting them into an organism, those can disrupt that expression, the RNA that makes all the proteins, and interfere with it. And so you have these what are called interfering RNAs. You see them in this picture. They look like little hairpins of these RNA molecules, which can basically bind to a piece of RNA that's supposed to be producing a protein and then kind of break it up. And by breaking up, it basically silences the expression of those genes. It doesn't produce the proteins that's supposed to be made. And that takes away the things that are needed for the organism's survival. So this is a way that you can kill, by intervening midway, a pest, an insect, or so forth. And this is now what's happening with these RNAi sprays, these gene silencing sprays. So we can go forward here, where the idea is you'll spray these tiny RNA strands over a crop. They'll get ingested by a beetle or an insect. And then it will change the genetics on the field. So whereas previously the genetic engineering happened beforehand in the lab, now the genetics are being changed out in the field. It's like the field has become an open air genetic engineering lab. It's a so-called transient modification. And there's a number of companies that are now working on this. The largest pesticide companies, BASF, Bayer, and so forth, Syngenta, are all trying to see if they can have these sprays which interfere with the RNA expression, for example, of the varroa mite, which is affecting bees. And the company that's really furthest along with this is a company called Greenlight Biosciences. Greenlight Biosciences has produced one of these sprays of RNAi, interfering RNA strands, which will get inside and interfere with the the Colorado potato beetle. And not only are they experimenting with this, they actually got approval in January for this to be commercially sold. It's through a very unexpected fast track approval, even though there hasn't really been proper long-term testing. They were approved for selling this. So if you now go to Greenlight Bioscience's website, you can buy their RNA sprays to spray on your own potatoes if you wanted to. And we're finding that the largest potato growers in the country, those who supply to Kettle Chips, for example, or Frito-Lays, are already testing these. And that's concerning. You can see here in this picture, Kettle Chips claim to be a non-GMO product, but this is clearly genetic engineering. It's genetic engineering on the field, and this is a concerning thing for certainly consumer right to know. But it has a number of other concerns. So just to very quickly touch on those, when you interfere with the RNA to try and target whether it's the Colorado beetle or so forth, those RNA strands may go elsewhere. They may interfere with other insects. They may interfere with other parts of the ecosystem, and you get unwanted silencing of living processes elsewhere in the ecosystem. That's very concerning, and we've already seen how RNA strands that have been developed for interfering have already affected bees, for example. So this is a major concern. There's a concern about what does it mean for humans who are on the field too, particularly farm workers who are not wearing PPE, the protective gear, that they could also ingest these RNA strands, which could have some sort of interference within their own gut or within their own body. That's definitely of concern, and there may be some concerns around human safety. There just hasn't been long-term testing, despite, of course, the companies claiming that there's no issue here. There are nano safety questions. The way in which you get these RNA strands into the gut of the organism is through nanoparticles, which are designed to move very easily through the body, across the gut, across other barriers in your body. So there's concerns that will also mean that these RNA strands can last longer in the environment and spread much further to places they're not expected to. And perhaps most importantly, this is
Jim,
about
you have 2
extending.
minutes.
Thanks very much, Dana. This is really about extending the idea of pesticides, the so-called pesticide paradigm. After the Second World War, we saw companies saying that the way to do industrial agriculture is to attack pests, so-called pests, with chemical weapons, which are pesticides. And now they're saying that's what we need to continue doing, but we'll now move on to genetic weapons with genetic pesticides. These are RNAi pesticides. Of course, what we've seen in real life over the last 70, 80 years is that the use of pesticides, chemical pesticides, has created resistance. And so they've had to use ever stronger and ever more problematic chemicals. And we'll see that with genetic pesticides too, that these organisms will also develop resistance. In fact, some already have done. And of course, this is all a strategy to build the power and increase the power of those agribusiness companies. But not only will they increase their market power if they're successful in tying this to their digital platforms, they're claiming through their patents that they don't only own the technology, they own the places the technology goes. That if this are used on the field, they'll also own the crops, they'll own the insects as well. So there's a lot of concerns here to deal with. Luckily, Friends of the Earth has written an incredible report, Gene Silencing Pesticides. I encourage everybody to read it. It will tell you much more than I've been able to in 15 minutes. And my own writing on this and other issues you can find at scanthehorizon.org. Hopefully that's a bit of an introduction to this part of the story. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jim. That was a lot combined into a small space. So we are going to turn our attention next to Angel Garcia, who's going to speak to us about genetically engineered insects. Thank you, Angel.
Yeah, so I just want to preface by saying that I will be touching very sort of quick snapshot of G insects, and nowhere near the complexity nor the experience that Mr. Thomas here has. In any case, next slide, please. So briefly, genetically engineered insects, what exactly are they? So I guess one way to look at them is that these are insects whose genetic material has been altered via genetic engineering. And it's a new class of biotech experimentation, biotech experiments that are often being framed as beneficial, as a solution to disease burden, to addressing food security, to protecting the environment, pesticide reduction, for example. It's essentially the sort of the game plan, right? As mentioned, for the sort of co-optation, ever-growing co-optation of future industrial ag. Next slide, please. However, these biotech experiments do present unforeseen health implications to people and really gets us asking, what will happen with large scale or the mere release of genetically engineered organisms into the environment, into society? And is this a risk that we as a society are willing to take? Here you have the genetically engineered diamondback moth. This genetically engineered cabbage moth was released into plots in upstate New York in 2015 to help reduce moth population by causing moth females to die off and thus shrink the population there. But cage trials, however, found that they didn't really work and could actually hurt sales. It has an impact on the export market there. And then there's also the genetically engineered olive fly that was scheduled to be released in Spain, but did not happen over the concern for people and the environment. And also, what will this mean for sales of the olive within the olive industry? And then finally, you also have this other example of in the form of the genetically engineered fruit fly that was going to be released in Brazil, but ended up not having some sort of experimental trial because the fruit fly would have contaminated with its GE materials and would have been unable to be sold in the market. So the wave is coming. The wave of genetically engineered insects is here, but it's also bringing along a lot of questions that in some cases we are sort of addressing head on, but in other cases, you know, they've been deployed into the environment as mentioned, and that is a major concern, major concern. Next slide, please. Here is an example of the genetically engineered armyworm, which was approved just last month for use for experimentation in Paraguay. And previous to this, this genetically engineered caterpillar was approved in Brazil, and Oxitec, the company that is spearheading this experimented via field trials during the 2021 and 2022 corn crop season on thousands of hectares of commercial corn in Brazil's key corn growing region. And again, the technology involves males passing down to offspring the self-limiting gene, which would cause maggots to die off. Now, but because wild armyworms are widespread, this would also mean that the deployment of them will be in similar manner. That is, genetic engineered armyworms would need to be released on a massive scale across region each season, which would be very costly. And then there's also the concern, ever-growing concern of like contamination. Let's say that if it were to work, dead genetically engineered larvae would contaminate and stay in the crop. And so a widespread release of genetically engineered insects really runs a risk of contaminating surrounding farms, gardens, and community. So we've seen that in different parts of the world, including the US, the wave of genetically engineered insects meant for industrial ag use appears to not be working for the community and also for ag. I mean, you have risk contamination of surrounding agricultural activity, and also poses a risk to export markets. So this genetically engineered insect product paradigm, we don't know really much about it. And so it's that in of itself should be a major red flag. Next slide, please. And what really got me concerned and involved with this whole conversation around genetically engineered organisms is the genetically engineered mosquito, the Aedes aegypti, which is one that was developed by Oxitec, and they are bringing it, or have been wanting to bring it, to California. In 2022, the US EPA approved a permit application for its experimentation and sent it over to California's Department of Pesticide Regulation, who oversee anything that relates to pesticides in California. And so right now it is, they're the ones that would be tasked with either allowing or denying the release of genetically engineered mosquitoes in California. Next slide, please. And briefly, Oxitec engineered a yellow fever mosquito to reduce the population of mosquitoes that can carry diseases like yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, and Zika, none of which are prevalent in California or in the US outside of Puerto Rico. And while it is important to address mosquito-borne disease, there are risks and concerns involved with this type of open-air experiment. For one, what happens once mosquitoes are released into the environment and there's just simply no way to call them back should there be any negative environmental or other type of unwanted outcome? It's pretty much a done deal once they're out. And there's also ongoing, as in the case of just genetically engineered insects, this ongoing public health concerns. In the case of G mosquitoes, there is the risk of crossbreeding with wild mosquitoes, which could, that may be carrying additional diseases and might bring a wave of insecticide-resistant offspring, which can lead to even more spraying, as if Tulare County or the state of California doesn't already do that. And there's also the environmental justice layer, which I think is very, very important to also include in this type of conversation. I mean, the potential release of the G mosquito in California was scheduled to be in Tulare County, and this is an area where there's a strong presence of farm workers who struggle and have historically struggled with illnesses caused by pesticide exposure, by heat exhaustion, by lack of access to drinkable water, or just water in general. And so why are we even, why is this even part of a conversation? Like, this is a community that's already impacted and overburdened by environmental injustices. And as it is, Tulare County, I mean, there's, it's not an ideal place for female mosquitoes because they can survive if they're exposed to a common antibiotic used in citrus orchards and in dairy farms that increases their survival rate. So it really doesn't, it's hard to reconcile other than because they can.
And you have 2 minutes left.
And so, next slide, please. Yeah, so, I mean, regulatory, there's social concerns, there's no transparency, and it is California, I mean, there is no state regulation for genetically engineered mosquitoes. So it's a really precedent-setting moment. It's one of those moments where we have to get engaged. We have to be involved in this because it's happening and it's happening fast. So, and a lot of this information is actually not being shared with the public. So that in itself even adds another sort of dimension of urgency to this conversation. Next slide, please. And then on the last note, the fight right now is in Tulare County, among other areas, of course. But Tulare County is one that has over 40,000 farm workers. Over 60% of the total population are Latino, a county that is dotted with unincorporated communities. Oftentimes, these are groups of homes that are on the peripheries of towns and cities. It is a county that has some of the worst air quality in the nation. It's consistently ranking top 3 in the state in terms of overall agricultural pesticide use. That's Tulare County, and this is where they want to take this. They want to bring this experiment to this community. And so what do we do? Next slide, please. We got to fight back. We got to get up, fight back, got to get engaged. And so I really want to echo the urgency and a call to action to really, really get involved. Join the Friends of the Earth listserv, connect with Friends of the Earth, because this is happening and it's happening real fast, and we have to push back. And with that, thank you, and I'll pass it over to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Angel. I really appreciate your naming what's happening, and particularly for your own county in California. I'm going to pass it now to Kendra Klein, who is going to speak to genetically engineered soil microbes. Thanks, Kendra.
Thank you. And thanks so much all for joining us today. I'm just waiting on controls of the slides. Oh, it says I have it. Let's try again. There we go. So I'm going to dive down into the soil. And let's just go right there and think a little bit about why soil is so important. It is the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet. In a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are more microbes than there are people on Earth. And those microbes are at the heart of our ability to continue farming sustainably. They make nutrients available for plants. They help plants fight pests and diseases. And they also are really critical to farmers' ability to have resilience in the face of droughts and floods, and to sequester more carbon in the soil. So incredibly important ecosystem. And, layers of interacting microbiomes on our farms, and the choices that we make about how we farm really impact those microbiomes. So whether we're using synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, or using compost, all these many decisions that we're making. And just to say that farmers have been working with microbiomes since ancient times. Adding compost to the soil is feeding the soil microbiome. It was in the early 19th century that scientists began isolating specific microbes. And in 1938 in France, farmers for the first time used Bt, bacteria with pesticidal qualities, and added it to their farming system. So that's the first, what we might call a biological. And what are biologicals? This term is used to apply to any product that we use in agriculture that's derived from living organisms, from microorganisms and plants. And this is in contrast to nearly all modern pesticides and fertilizers and inputs to the farm that are derived from fossil fuels. So biologicals can act to improve plant growth, crop nutrition, and to manage pests and diseases. And there's now 1,200 different biologicals companies around the world. I do want to call out a challenge with that term, that the EPA has now used the term to apply to genetically engineered microbes, gene silencing pesticide sprays, and GE insects. So now we need to be very careful with the term, because nearly all traditional biologicals are approved for use in organic production, whereas none of these GE technologies would be. So something for us to debate. We're in the midst of a booming biologicals market. A conference that I went to, a representative from Syngenta said biologicals used to be the the odd man out in the room, but now every company wants to do something with them. So you can see this incredible growth, and that biopesticides are predicted to grow at the fastest rate. And we have all of the major pesticide companies jumping into this space with incredible consolidation in the past 10 years. And they're buying up those traditional biologicals companies, as well as companies that give them the platforms and the resources to genetically engineer microbes for use in agriculture. So this report is available if you just Google the title, but we dive deeper into the risks and concerns that I'm going to move through fairly quickly here with you. There are 2 products that are currently on the market that we know of, I should say. It's difficult to really find out what's been commercialized. One is a product from a company called Pivot Bio that was released in 2019. They claim by 2020 it was used on over 3 million acres of cropland. This is primarily monoculture corn and soy. And what they did was genetically engineer a bacteria that naturally fixes nitrogen, which is a nutrient that crops need, and they eliminated the off switch. So naturally, that bacteria in a nitrogen-rich environment would downregulate its fixation, but they have eliminated its ability to do so that it will continue to produce nitrogen. The stated goal here is to replace synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, which we know is a very important environmental goal. Widespread contamination of water, waterways, and dead zones around the world caused by nitrogen fertilizer, as well as a very large climate impact. However, despite headlines claiming that this company has succeeded with this product, there's no peer-reviewed data showing that this bacteria can indeed replace synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and be effective. The other that's on the market is the next generation of Poncho Votivo. So this was historically a seed treatment developed by Bayer. Poncho is a neonicotinoid insecticide. Votivo is a not engineered nematicide microorganism. And they have added this 2.0, the genetically engineered Bt bacteria. And what they've done is taken this very ancient understanding that healthy soils produce healthy plants, which are better able to resist pests and diseases. And they've applied that concept in the most reductionist way by adding to the seed coating a bacteria aimed at converting dead plant residue in the soil to sugars, which would feed the plants, which would feed the microbial activity in the soil to release nutrients for the plants and make them healthier. This is happening in abundance in ecologically managed soils. There's no need to engineer bacteria to accomplish this goal. We don't know what else has been commercialized or what's in the pipeline. There is an incredible wall of silence from regulatory agencies. The EPA's website states it has registered 8 GE microbes as pesticides, but we don't know much more than that. And then the image you're seeing here is from a letter submitted by Pivot Bio to the USDA, and this is how it appears in the public record. It's 4 pages of a completely blank table. Everything is redacted as confidential business information, including the name of the microbe that they've engineered. So this completely undermines our ability as a public, as independent scientists, and as policymakers to grapple with questions around these technologies and to make science-based decisions about them. So diving into some risks and concerns, I want to start just with really conveying the limits of our knowledge. That we are like the sorcerer's apprentice here. We can accomplish some activities, but it doesn't mean that we fully understand or can control the outcomes. As one sort of indication of this, the patent for Pivot Bio's proven product is sort of fascinating to read. They talk about myriad different genes and enzymes and proteins that are involved in nitrogen fixation that they were experimenting with, and use words like trick the microbe into not being able to sense nitrogen in the environment and short circuit its ability to downregulate nitrogen fixation. And their own peer-reviewed research shows that they were surprised that their interventions functioned, right? So we're tinkering, but tinkering doesn't mean that we truly understand the incredible complexity of genomic activity, which increasingly we understand how limited our knowledge really is in this realm. And then there's the fact that more and more evidence is emerging on the unintended genetic consequences of our engineering, and that includes for gene editing techniques like CRISPR, which are claimed to be more precise, but what we're seeing is they're resulting in genetic consequences that we did not intend. And then
Kendra, you have 2 minutes left.
oh, I'm going to go really fast. And there's, of course, the ecological consequences. In two ways, this is very distinct from genetically engineered crops. One is the scale of release, that in just a half acre of releasing GE bacteria, we'll be releasing as many modified organisms as in the entire amount of GE corn that is planted each year in the US. And then the fact that microbes can engage in horizontal gene transfer. So asexual reproduction that can transfer genetic material across even unrelated organisms. And so there's really no possibility for containment. This can result in changes to microbial communities, risk of invasive species, and furthering that pesticide treadmill. There's no reason to assume that just because it's an engineered microbe acting as a pesticide, that if you're releasing it, season by season across a monoculture production system, that is not going to contribute to the same pesticide treadmill. So these are really false and very reductionist quote unquote solutions to systemic problems, which we have decades of data showing us true solutions in the form of agroecological production. To quickly flag that people have raised concerns about human health risks, it's reasonable to assume that some amount of the bacteria would end up on crops that make it onto people's plates. And then we code for antibiotic resistance in many genetically engineered organisms. And so what does that mean if we're increasing the antibiotic resistance of a fungal pathogen? What you're seeing here, a biological treatment, biocontrol treatment ending up in a farmer's eye, not an engineered fungus, but raises future concerns for GE bacteria. And then Jim touched a bit on the larger socioeconomic concerns, the ways in which these companies have enforced intellectual property rights in incredibly aggressive ways to disenfranchise farmers. And of course, there's no way to control the drift to organic farms, which disallow all genetically engineered products. You can get the short summary of these issues in this op-ed at Food Tank. And then, of course, these larger reports that dive much deeper. And I just want to end by saying there is expert consensus that we need to rapidly transition away from monoculture, industrial, input-intensive agriculture towards agroecological systems in order to address world hunger, the biodiversity, and climate crises that we're facing. All of the marketing companies are using around these technologies is this is the path towards climate-friendly agriculture and to save biodiversity and et cetera. So just to be aware of that spin and the fact that the very heavy weight of evidence points us towards agroecological systems.
Thanks so much, Kendra. I appreciate everything you're sharing. I am going to just very quickly talk about regulations, and then we will move into questions from all of you. So essentially, as you have heard, these new genetically engineered technologies and applications pose very significant risks for our health and environment, and there are little to no guardrails and regulations for these novel technologies and applications, not in the EPA, not in the USDA. We're seeing the deregulation at the FDA. And so actually what we're needing is an expanded and new regulations in the US to make sure that we aren't creating even worse problems. Next slide. One of the things that we are noting with all of these is it's a wave of false solutions, which takes us in the opposite direction and are perpetuating very, very harmful systems of contamination. They are well-resourced techno fixes that are currently pushed by the ag tech industry, as we saw from Kendra and Jim's slides. And many of these are billed as climate smart or nature-based solutions. And the money, the USDA is even giving a lot of money to some of these groups, including Greenlight Biosciences, as part of their climate smart initiative. Next slide. And so what we're seeing is a very strong deregulation trend, mostly pushed by industry. What we need is a responsible process for evaluating these novel applications that includes a multidisciplinary, independent experts and data review. That we need transparency to disclose all the data, particularly data that impacts public health. We need public participation, and we need independent oversight and monitoring of any experiments, so not done by the company. So these are things that we don't currently have. The programs that the regulations that govern these applications are incredibly uncoordinated. They're out of date. They're inadequate. They barely scratch the surface, unfortunately, for some of these novel technologies. And depending on the application, the authority may be split, for example, between the US EPA and the USDA, which creates a lot of confusion because some of the regulatory agencies even have different definitions of the technologies, what is gene editing, what isn't, what should be assessed, what shouldn't. So there's a lot of confusion there. To add to the problem, in 2022, the White House passed an executive order on advancing biotechnology and biomanufacturing under the guise that we need these technologies rushed to the market. And really confusing innovation with something that actually is good. And the result of that has meant that the regulations have become even weaker. Now there are a lot more of the applications in crops, particularly that don't have to go through risk assessments, that essentially the USDA rubber stamps applications, and a large number of these applications, including crops with stacked traits and more gene-edited applications, are voluntary. The risk assessment is voluntary. Next slide. And so I'll just name that, as we've seen and heard already, this regulatory system that we're seeing go under is marked by an incredible lack of transparency, and that's really driven by industry, which can decide what information is shared with the public under the confidential business information. And so companies are tracking their own products and letting the government agencies know what is happening or working, which is really the fox guarding the hen house concept. We often don't have the data we need to do assessment in public. We don't necessarily have the methodology about the data collection. So we're seeing a real cover on what we need to know. At the international level, we're seeing the influence of billionaire dollars, including from the Gates Foundation and the Bezos Foundation, pushing for these false solutions and are backed by a lot of money and pushing for deregulation. So I am sorry for that, very rushed. I'm going to stop there though, because I really want us to get to questions and answers. So next slide, you can see that there's a number of resources. There are also resources at scanthehorizon.org, at Californians for Pesticide Reform, Friends of the Earth. Please take a look. They go into deep detail as to regarding what we were just discussing. So I'm going to pause there, and you can see our information on the last slide if you could advance that. So there have been a number of questions that have been posed, some of them about the UN and different rights to the human rights. And then there's another question. I think, Kendra, maybe you want to start by answering this one about data that shows that Pivot Bio GE bacteria are effective or not. Are they persistent in the environment? Do you have anything that you want to share or further information you can point to?
Yeah, so on Pivot Bio, the company's own peer-reviewed published field trial data did not even replace or reduce any of the applications of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Despite that being the stated claim of the technology, it only evaluated how crop yield was impacted by adding proven on top of the grower's existing use of synthetic fertilizer. There are instances where there was like some small increase in yield. But that's telling and concerning that they're not even testing whether this product can help to replace fertilizer. So there's no available data showing that this product is efficacious. And sorry, the second part of that question was what? Dana?
If they persist in the environment.
Oh, yeah. So so far okay. I can't say that the company is or is not tracking that and what the data is. What we do see in biologicals to date is that they typically don't persist in the environment, and particularly in healthy soil ecosystems, that the robustness of the existing microbial community sort of overwhelms any introduced microorganism. That said, in the very depleted soil ecosystems of monoculture crop production, there's perhaps an increased likelihood that these introduced GE microbes would take hold and be more persistent because there's not a robust community to overwhelm them. So that question of persistence is a very important one, and another one to have in our minds that companies could also engineer for persistence. And that would be incredibly concerning because it would give those GE microbes an added advantage in the ecosystem to take over and become perhaps invasive.
Thanks so much, Kendra. There's another question about the studies about the long-term impacts of genetically engineered species. And so I'm guessing that's genetically engineered species like insects, the impact on from the RNAi sprays. And I think that maybe is a question of, do we know how, or have there been the risk assessments? And Jim, I wonder if you have anything that you want to say about the monitoring, oversight, or risk assessments that might exist for these long-term impacts.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. I think you're getting to the right point there. I mean, obviously, to ask for studies about long-term effects requires a long term to actually track what's happening. And at the international level, the agreements, for example, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, theoretically depend upon the idea of the precautionary principle, that until, if there's some evidence of concern, then you wouldn't release until you've got a very strong understanding that these are safe. That's not happening here. It's the commercial pressure to move forward with releases of whether it's genetically engineered insects or gene drives or RNA sprays is running far ahead of any kind of risk assessment or other assessments for monitoring and regulation. So at the international level, I'm part of an expert group on synthetic biology, which roughly describes some of this area, where we're charged with seeing what are these new emerging areas. That expert group has pointed to RNAi sprays, for example. It's pointed to self-limiting insects. It's pointed to the microbials and genetically engineered microbials as areas that really need to be slowed down and properly studied, and before regulation and oversight can be put in place. But that hasn't happened yet. So until you have an oversight framework that says take precaution, take your time, understand this before you move ahead with releases, then we're just running after the problem. And the US is 10 times worse, of course.
Thanks so much, Jim. I see a question about the current status of the EU regulation of these new genetic technologies. And I would welcome other people from this panel to jump in. But essentially, we're seeing the EU struggle with whether or not to follow the path of the United States, as the United States has deregulated a number of technologies, particularly gene editing, which is a type of genetic engineering, and the science is rapidly showing that it causes a whole slew of unintended consequences, genetic chaos, that it's not neat and tidy. There's not the precision that's claimed by the industry, that it really is perpetuating all the problems that we've been seeing. And unfortunately, because of trade impacts and industry arguments, the EU Parliament is struggling with this idea of whether or not to follow that path of deregulation for gene editing. And I know that right now it's really in process, where Parliament is discussing whether or not to move ahead with deregulation. And it looks very divided, where there are a number of countries that are pushing for that, and other countries that are trying to stay strong. For a long time, Europe has been sort of our North Star, taking more of a precautionary approach and having much more strict regulations around genetically engineered organisms and the derivatives of genetically engineered organisms. And so it is a pretty strong concern if they start to follow the path of the United States. I wonder if any of you want to add to that with regards to what's happening in Europe. And then I think we can take one or two more questions. Yep. Okay. There's another question about what is the most constructive response now for the public, for governments, for industry. How do we respond? And I think that what it means is how do we respond to the deregulation trend, or how do we respond to these risky technologies that are needing oversight? And Angel, I'm wondering what you're thinking about this, particularly as Tulare County has become in the international spotlight for a potential release of a genetically engineered insect that could set a pathway for the whole pipeline of agriculture insects. What are you seeing on the ground, or how do you see the response that's needed at the local level?
Absolutely. I think that there's just coming from sort of an organizing background, I think we do have opportunity to push back at the local level in terms of really elevating and uplifting the concerns. So that means going to the local meetings where these type of conversations are happening. And oftentimes these meetings, even though they're public, they're not well attended. And so I know that certainly made a splash in Tulare County when we a group of concerned community members showed up to the local mosquito vector board meeting and really shared their concerns over the potential release of GE mosquitoes in Tulare County. And so I think that sort of had ripple effects in the local region. So I guess that is to say, one immediate thing is to connect with local organizations, disseminate, and I think bring in Friends of the Earth to these spaces to get the information. Because I think part of this is it's going to require an ongoing educational campaign. Because if people don't know, there won't be a reaction, a movement behind this. But if the more people know, the more people that know about the risks involved, I mean, I think that could be one important step to do. I mean, just to connect locally and disseminate that information with concerned people, and then yeah, I mean, and escalate it. escalate that template, that movement. So go to start local, but also in California, for example, Department of Pesticide Regulation is the one that oversees everything. So, sometimes it might have to mean going to Sacramento. So yeah, just entering any entry points of engagement.
Thank you, Angel. I know that we're at time, but I want to just squeeze in a couple of seconds. There was one question about the use of these technologies in other countries across Latin America, India, Africa, elsewhere. Jim, do you want to take 30 seconds and answer that?
Yeah, no, the biotechnology industry is global, and they're trialing these in many places. So particularly the insects, the front end of the work on GE insects has been led by Oxitec, and they've been doing that in Southeast Asia. They've been doing that in Brazil. There's been quite a lot of releases of genetic engineering in Brazil, throughout the Caribbean, and there the work that's been done by Oxitec releasing genetically engineered mosquitoes has shown all sorts of problems and hasn't been at all effective in suppressing dengue or malaria or other things that they're claiming. And that's something that's become clear where they have used particularly southern countries as testing grounds. It hasn't really suppressed the diseases they claim they're suppressing. And there's been quite strong protest. Gene drives was mentioned. Gene drives, which are a type of genetically engineered insects being developed, genetically engineered insects being released in Burkina Faso, and there's been massive protests by farmers and others in Burkina Faso against that. So yeah, this is very much global.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This, for me, has been a very enlightening call, if not sobering. And we're going to be following up. We'll follow up with the link to this presentation. It'll also have Spanish subtitles so you can share to many different groups. We'll be following up with links to materials. And hopefully all of you will be aware and ready to take action. We're seeing more and more of these applications come online, for some of them for public comment, some of them not. But we'd love to stay in touch with all of you, particularly those of you who are interested in organizing around these topics, right? That we need to be joining together. This isn't about one group or another organizing, but this is all of us together with these new trends in agriculture. So please take note of the emails of everybody on this call, and we will be in touch to start working together as a movement. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.